On this week's episode of Inside Outside Innovation, we talk about why 70% of startup acquisitions fail, why UX didn't die, and how everyone is still building their startups backwards. Let's get started. Inside Outside Innovation is the podcast to help innovation leaders navigate what's next. Each week, we'll give you a front row seat into what it takes to grow and thrive in a world of hyper uncertainty and accelerating change. Join me, Brian Ardinger, and Miles Zero's Robyn Bolton as we discuss the latest tools, tactics, and trends for creating innovations with impact. Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. I'm your host, Brian Ardinger, and I have with me Robyn Bolton, as always, from Miles Zero. Welcome, Robyn.
Thank you. Great, as always, to be here.
We are excited to have you, excited to get into the news of the day and some of the amazing things that we're hearing in the world of innovation. We are going to start with the first article. The first article comes from our friend Elliott at Parker. Elliott is with Allied Partners. He's actually coming out to the summit. So not only are we going to talk about his article today, but you can come and see him live and in person, April 13th. Let's now talk about his article, Why 70% of Startup Acquisitions Fail, the Learning versus Execution Problem. And Elliott talks about, first of all, he cites some statistics that large companies acquire startups at a 70 to 90% failure rate. Yet the same research shows that bolt-on acquisitions, when you buy a company in the same industry that's doing similar work, the success rate climbs to 80 to 85% of the time. And he poses the question, what's the key difference? And the key difference really is the fact that you're really working in two different worlds. You're working either in a learning problem world, such as a startup trying to understand who their customers are and what they're building, et cetera, or an execution problem world where you figured a lot of that out, and your job then is to efficiently scale and predict and move that business model forward. And I think basic premise is that large organizations oftentimes don't know exactly which startup they're buying. Are they buying a startup that has figured it out, or have they bought a startup that's still learning, and then that integration is where it all falls down?
Yeah, I will continue the shameless plug. I am a huge Elliott fan. We've worked together. We've co-authored articles way back when together, and he is just a really smart, really great guy. So highly recommend everybody come and see him, mob him at the IO 2026 conference. And again, he hits the nail on the head of learning problem and an execution problem. It's different worlds. Innovation and operations are different. Pilots and scaling something are opposite problems. And the fact is, big companies are designed for execution. I mean, I still remember my days at P&G when we were test marketing Swiffer WetJet, and our test markets were Canada and Belgium. Those are countries, not test markets, but that's just how big companies are wired. And he makes a great argument backed up by facts around what the problem is and honestly what companies need to do about it is kind of recognize that these are opposite things and try to structure and approach the problems accordingly.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the day when you can spin up a startup in 5 minutes and and all the new things that are happening out there. How many large corporations might fall into that trap of looking for the shiny new thing and not realizing that it's not fully baked, and then it won't necessarily fit into the existing structures that they have and kill it from that perspective? Or will we get it to a place where you can build a startup and get to execution much faster, such that those acquisitions can dovetail right into an existing business? So it'd be interesting to see how that changes over the time period as well.
Yeah. And, will organizations, the failure mode I see most often is they think, oh, there's market traction, there's revenue, the startup may even be profitable. And they think, great, it's no longer a learning problem, it's an execution problem. So realizing that just because there's revenue, just because maybe it's even cash flow positive, doesn't mean it's ready for scale.
Absolutely. All right. The second article is UX didn't die. It just stopped being about screens. This is from Nurkhon, if I'm reading that right, Nurkhon. He has a Medium article talking about this particular thing. And he's basically saying that the skills that matter are different than what they've been in the past. So he goes through an example where he asked Cursor to redesign a checkout flow for a thing he was building. It generated the perfect UI in 30 seconds, all the correct ratios, proper button states, etc. Then he showed it to 3 customers, and they all abandoned the project at the exact same stop. The UI was perfect, but the problem was something else. And this gap between what it looks right, the functionality, and what actually works is where UX value really lives in 2026. And that's an interesting thing that we're seeing more and more. What's your take on that?
I think it's another great example of what noted innovation philosopher Mike Tyson said, that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And this is another example of AI designing something that is perfect, but then when exposed to reality, and that reality being the unusual, illogical, wonderful nature of human beings, it just gets punched in the face. It doesn't work. So I was actually really glad to see the 7 skills that he listed as mattering: systems thinking, feedback translation, there's judgment again. I feel like that's becoming a theme. Pattern recognition, trust building. All of these skills are fundamentally human skills. And I think it's just another great illustration of how AI can't replace us yet.
It'll also be interesting to see from the perspective of, again, if these systems they're basically coming to commodity decisions. They look at everything out there, they
Yep.
find the best route to it and say, here's what the average says about it. Most people shouldn't be building average. You have unique customers with unique problems, with unique environments around that. And so at the end of the day, that's still your job as a UX UI designer or a business owner to figure out what are those problems you're solving for your specific audience, and then how can you solve that the best for them, not hope that the average is good enough.
Yeah, and there's a little glimmer of hope in his article that organizations are growing design teams by 51%, not shrinking them. I just hope that as they're hiring those design teams, they're letting the designers bring their perspective, bring their humanity to the design versus kind of going to the average.
All right, our third article is Everyone is Still Building Their Startups Backwards. And it's from Aaron Dinnan. He's been a regular contributor to the newsletter over the years. He always writes some great stuff. And this one is very much on the core of other articles that we hosted from him, talking about the fact that a large majority of startups oftentimes start with the solution. They don't look forward to actually who they're serving. And if you just flip that little switch, you can have a much better chance of success if you try to figure out who you're building for versus what you're building.
Yeah, I feel like this advice has become the like eat your vegetables version of advice because we all know what we're supposed to do, and so few people actually do it. I was just at lunch today with a friend. She has the startup she's been working on for 4 years. She's got a co-founder who's comes from this incredible technical background. And she's talking about all the accelerators she's in and how most of the folks we're in Boston, so straight out of postdocs, and they've got a solution and there's no product market fit. So this is real, this is broccoli, and you still need to do it.
Well, and I think a lot of folks, they underestimate the fact that if you can find a customer and really focus on what they're doing in that, it opens up more opportunities than you would realize. Because,
Yeah.
again, customers will tell you what they don't like about things. People are great at complaining about and telling you about their particular problems. And if you just listen and you say, I want to serve this particular customer segment or really understand what they're doing, oftentimes you are exposed to things that where it's like, oh, wait, I can actually sell that for them. And that's actually a bigger market or something that's
Mm.
easier for me to build. And you let the customer drive that particular conversation versus, again, trying to shoehorn a particular solution into a customer that, it may work, but it may not.
And I so often hear founders say, well, I'm the customer. Like I'm the first customer. And sometimes I hear things like that in the context of, oh, we've built a new medical device to identify cancer. I'm like, really? You're the customer? Like, well, no, but I think like a customer. So like, I just wish we could convince everyone of exactly what you said, of the genius and the opportunity and the excitement and the freedom that comes with designing to serve customers.
Well, we will keep at it, and I'm sure you'll hear us talk about it again and again. So, the last article, we're not going to really talk about it, but I thought it was interesting that popped up on the plate. Is talking about, it's called Move Over Unicorns. Soonicorns are taking over the startup world in 2026. So now we've moved on from unicorns. We're now talking about soonicorns. And a soonicorn is a company that is valued between 500 million and 999 million, not quite the billionaire status. But those particular soonicorns are rising across the United States. Research says there's about 2,000 of these soonicorns in the US alone, dramatically up from a decade ago. There's not much to discuss here other than it's kind of an interesting phrase and how people are trying to, again, redefine what's going on in the startup world and the move to valuations.
Love the term Sunicorn. Cannot wait to see what the next corn is. Great article, great point, great term.
Excellent. All right, tactics to try. This week, I have a tactic that's from our friend Ben Yaskovitz. We talked about Ben, I think, last episode. He was talking about angel investing, but he is with Highline Beta, and they have come up with some amazing tools. So if you go to Highline Beta, they've got a new toolkit that's free to use right now. It's called Tools for Building New Ventures. And if you go over there, they've mapped out basically their toolkit for building corporate startups and gives you a way to actually put your own ideas through the particular system. And everything from a problem validator to a problem interview generator to an assumption tracker. And these are like little mini tools that you can use to help move your idea along. So I highly encourage people to take a look at that and check that out.
As soon as you shared it with me, Brian, I bookmarked it. I realized it's putting a lot of people out of a job because this was the core of what I did at a previous firm. The tools are great. So I'm going to use it. It's a great place to start.
Excellent. Well, that concludes another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. We'll look forward to seeing you next week. And until then, go out and innovate.
See you later.
That's it for another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. Today's episode was produced and engineered by Susan Steibel. If you want to learn more about our teams, our content, our services, check out insideoutside.io. Or if you want to connect with Robyn Bolton, go to mileszero.io. And until next time, go out and innovate.